This is City on the Edge, the podcast where we tell Albuquerque and New Mexico stories. Joining me today, I've got Mike Smith and someone we haven't seen in a while, Roland Pentilla, who has been on the show several times. I think most recently was the Little Beaver Town, or was it the submarine marching through the streets?
May have been the submarine.
Yeah, but we're happy to have you back with us, and you've got a pretty cool story about the time a nuclear bomb was dropped on Albuquerque, among other things.
This is so crazy. I can't believe it's true.
One of the strangest stories. But before that, I thought, Mike, you had a story about a plane crash that was had a bit of a mystery attached to it.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say. I wrote an article some time ago on since we're going to be talking about military crashes today and military accidents in this area. This piece was less about that and more of a general sort of look at crashes in the Sandias in general. And there have been a lot. I mean, everyone knows the TWA crash, which is the big famous one.
We talked about that on the show, of course.
How many people? 13 people.
I can't remember offhand, but yeah.
Crashed into the Sandias in a snowstorm, and that's very the best known of them. We did didn't we do an episode about that? I feel like we did.
We definitely did. Yeah, it's been a while though.
It's totally been a while. But there were many others as well. There were a number of small plane crashes. There were well, I'm going to leave all the military stuff out because Roland's going to get into that. But people were training there through World War II, and there were commercial crashes all through the middle of the century. And really every single mountain range around here has had crashes too. Mount Taylor, we all talk about the TWA crash in the Sandias, but Mount Taylor had the crash that created TWA and basically a lot of the federal oversight of the airlines, because it was one of the biggest crashes at that time ever on Mount Taylor. And Charles Lindbergh was out here flying around looking for him.
When was this?
This was in one of the early 20s, I think.
Oh, okay.
A crash on Mount Taylor. I mean, the Manzanos have had crashes. Sandia, some of the interesting ones to me. I heard this one, but then I don't know, because we were talking with Roland before the show, and some of the details sound like didn't happen in the Sandias. Regardless, it definitely happened in the Albuquerque area when a plane went down with a lot of people with winnings back from Las Vegas, and it became the object of a treasure hunt. People looking for the winnings from this crash. There was also one in Tejares Canyon that there were only 2 people on the plane that were in the flight logs and everything, but 3 bodies were found. So everyone was like, what's going on with these people?
Yeah, it's a little peculiar.
Turns out they were, it was all on the level. They were transporting a body for burial.
Oh, okay. So that person was listed as cargo.
Yeah. So, but it's still sad. Then they all died. I mean, those stories are crazy when people die on the way to a funeral or something like that.
Yeah.
But those things, the things that Roland is going to talk about tonight are, I think, in general, bigger stories than these sorts of smaller ones that happened. But I mean, the fact is, this whole land is just, shingled in stories like this, but also.
I thought you were going to say aircraft parts.
Well, yeah, to some degree, yeah. I mean, if you walk up to the TWA crash, you'll see those, and other places haven't been cleaned up as well. I've heard about sites that are really somber because there's still bits of bone and teeth.
Oh my God, really?
That, horrifying. Because how do you clean up some of these remote sites?
Yeah.
There was that one in the Sandias several years ago that rescuers couldn't get to the wreckage easily because there were bears eating everybody. It's It's still really wild up there. It's still totally
true.
Uncharted land in a way. These reclusive canyons. I mean, I have a story we'll probably get to someday about someone who was lost in the mountains for a while in the 80s, and it was it's a wild place back there. It really is. But
especially if you go up in the winter or something like that.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Okay.
So,
I think you're breaking up there, Mike.
Oh, but I'm really excited to hear what Roland has prepared for us tonight. So, I don't know. I'm excited to hear what Roland has to say.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so Roland, you're a what? We've introduced you in the past, of course, but you're a local historian. You do a lot of work with the Historical Society, and what other sort of pursuits are you up to these days?
Um,
Sheltering in place,
just like
trying not to
everybody
breathe
else,
anyone else's air.
just like everybody else.
Historical detective as much.
I'm keeping it on the down low.
Yeah, good for you, man.
So we aren't meeting anymore. The historical societies used to meet every third Sunday over at the museum, and that discontinued sometime in March, and we haven't started up. We've had a number of video meetings, not so many with the Albuquerque Historical Society, but we did with Historical Albuquerque Incorporated, and they saw fit to appoint me as their treasurer. So I'm leaving for Mexico tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Glad we got you in here today.
I'm kidding.
Okay.
Mexico.
Yeah. Okay. You got all. Sorry, I'm slow on the uptake. But yeah, I got it. You got you. They're $35 in their treasury.
So actually, it's a $37.50. So
we're
way better off than you thought. In fact, Mexico is an interesting story because I had a trip to go meet a friend in La Paz, Mexico, in late February, early March. And so I went on that trip, and I was there for 4 days and came back on Sunday. And my sister-in-law, who had some health problems, demanded that I quarantine at the house here for 14 days before I came anywhere near her. At that point, coronavirus was in the news, but it was like it's in China. It's not really here.
Yeah.
And we had no idea
those beautiful days.
Yeah, I remember March.
Yeah. Those halcyon days of blissful ignorance. So that's been, now I did that research and story on Little Beavertown and gave a number of presentations about it, including on your show. Just recently, something happened. I found out through a weird means, somebody on the Historical Society found on YouTube a movie that was being shown of Little Beavertown. And so he shared it because he knew that there was an interest in it. Well, I immediately saw that it was probably something that was semi-professionally done because of the access that the photographers seemed to have. And it was taken on opening day, which is July 15th, 1961.
Wow.
And so I contacted the YouTuber. He's a really nice gentleman named Daniel Gibbons. And Daniel Gibbons gave me permission. In fact, he shipped that file to me in an MP4 today. And so I now have that. He believes that it was taken by Fred Harmon himself.
Wow.
So now I have that clip. He says it's color film 16 millimeter. So very few people in 61 were shooting 16 millimeters. So that's another clue that it was Fred Harmon. So then I asked him, how did he get a hold of it? And he said, well, I bought it in an antique store in Pagosa Springs.
Oh, yeah.
So I called 3 antique stores asking them if they had any Fred Harmon items from, because his, I guess that would have been his daughter-in-law recently died, Norma. And so they closed down the house, the museum up there. And I think the granddaughters just had a big estate sale. And I did get a call from one of the stores, Feather Your Nest is the name of it. And she may have Little Beavertown items from the Fred Harmon collection.
Amazing.
And just as a quick recap for people who may not have heard the earlier episode, Little Beaver was Red Ryder, the comic book cowboy's sidekick, and Albuquerque was the home of a Little Beaver theme park for about, what did we decide, 2 years?
3 years.
3 years
Wow.
in the
61 to
60s.
63.
Yeah, it was a failure. But also, Fred Harmon, the illustrator of the Red Ryder comics, lived here in Albuquerque for part of the year. So that's really cool.
That is cool. That was a great episode. I love that episode.
Yeah, one of my
His
favorites.
house, or his former house, I should say, is only about 3 blocks away from my house.
Yeah.
Wow.
I usually go by it when I walk the dogs, and we know the people that live there now, and they've invited me to come in and
That's so cool.
see it.
Sometime
Nice.
after the pandemic.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah. We returned to life.
So tell us about this. It's got a visual component too, but we're mainly, for the purposes of the podcast, we're going to be describing what's happening in the presentation. But if you are hearing this through the podcast and you want to see some images and so forth from the stories that Roland's going to be telling, you can go to our YouTube. It's City on the Edge podcast on YouTube. So you will be able to see that episode up there after we publish this. So, all right. Well, without further ado, why don't you tell us what we're in for tonight?
Okay. Well, I started off when I heard that there had been a nuclear bomb that had been dropped near Sunport, and that's the title, that's the headline, and it's like, what?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so-
I don't remember all the flesh melting off my bones.
So of course I asked all the people in the Historical Society, and they're going, I don't know anything about that. So of course that adds fuel to the fire of me trying to find out what happened. And I've done a bunch of research about that. And again, the details are not all known, or at least available, since it's a governmental accident, which I'm sure they're a little ashamed of, or embarrassed at least. And so it's very hard to get any details. Now, I could have filed a Freedom of Information Act, which I actually did with the Air Force. They told me I needed to do another one with the Nuclear Commission.
And those things are a huge pain, right?
However, everybody is out with Corona.
Yeah.
So all their files, all of their access to data that they could share with me if they decided to, it's not happening. So I'll try again after the pandemic.
Well, I hope you're successful with that.
Yeah, me too.
And I will say that I hope that there is a time called after the pandemic.
Yeah.
No
kidding, man.
Yeah.
What a drag.
Right now, the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train.
Right.
Well,
I mean, after the pandemic, not after the event. Or something like that.
We're on another downhill right now, which is nice. So, there's always, like, we've dropped cases successfully over the last few days.
Oh, that kind of downhill.
So, yeah, it's there's some hope anyway.
Yeah. Oh, and you will have to let me share my screen.
Yeah,
you have it blocked.
So, okay, that figures. Let me see if I
can.
Way
to go, Ty. Great. Roland's trying to share his screen, and what are you doing? Blocking it.
What if I make you a host? Will that do it?
Probably.
Okay, why don't you try that?
Okay. Great. Now he owns City on the Edge.
Oh man, here we go.
Oh.
The day a thermonuclear bomb was dropped on Albuquerque. That was a bad day. Not as bad as it could have been.
And other local military accidents. Oh my gosh.
So the accidents that I was going to be talking today are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, like about 9, less than 10 accidents, and we'll talk about the nuclear one first.
Okay.
But I was surprised at the number of military accidents, and as I said, I wanted to keep my talk just about military accidents, and I thought, well, I might have 3. Well, there was more than 3.
Right.
The first one is the headline grabber, the thermonuclear bomb.
Yeah.
So it was Wednesday, May 22nd of 1957. Think about where your audience may have been at that time.
Well, I know where we would have been. Which is nowhere at all.
That was a wheat field and an underground aquifer.
Yeah.
So this picture that the people on YouTube are seeing is a picture of the B-36 Peacemaker bomber made by Convair. And it was, I think it still holds the title as the largest military aircraft ever built.
I think it's a monster. I mean, look at it. It's just.
It is huge. It had 6 propellers that faced backwards
The wrong
that
way.
actually pushed the plane. And so it had a distinctive sound, you can imagine, with 6 propellers. Later models, they added 4 jet engines on 2 pods out towards the wingtips. So this plane was referred to as the plane that had 6 turning and 4 burning.
Wow.
And the whole point of this plane was to carry nuclear weapons for the Strategic Air Command.
It was built for the purpose.
Right. And the bomb that was in it the day that it approached Albuquerque was called the Mark 17, and one of the largest nuclear weapons ever built.
Jeez.
So you're saying, why did it come to Albuquerque? Glad you asked that question.
It came to Albuquerque?
It was on its way to Albuquerque.
To Albuquerque, okay.
It was flying here. Its intent was to land at Kirtland Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
And it had come from Biggs Airfield in El Paso, where these planes were, that was their home base.
Okay.
And the reason it was coming to Albuquerque is that these bombs, all the bombs, but the Mark 17 was ready for some routine maintenance, is what it was called. And I believe that they have to be, I don't know, tweaked. They need their bolts tightened and their screws.
Sure.
So it was bringing the bomb to Kirtland, where it would be offloaded, put on a truck, and taken either to Los Alamos, or the Los Alamos folks would come down to Kirtland and do that maintenance there.
Interesting.
It was not clear and not mentioned in any of my research what actually happened. So again, the picture of this Mark 17, if people in the Albuquerque area want to see a Mark 17 in real life, all they have to do is drive down to Eubank and Central at the National Museum of Nuclear Science, and there is one right there for you to get your selfie by it.
Now, is this like a uranium bomb or a plutonium bomb or fission or fusion?
They just call it thermonuclear.
Okay.
So that's all that I know. Now, you'll see in this picture that some are seeing that it has kind of a flat nose. Well, all these bombs that were carried by aircraft were not armed with the trigger that would make them a nuclear bomb. They had the material in them, but they needed something to really set off the nuclear explosion. And that was never installed in the bombs until the crew was given the orders that they were about to drop it, and then they would go back and arm it.
Stick it on the front. Yeah.
Yeah, these bombs were not armed while they were flying around. They still were dangerous, obviously, but they were not going to create the explosion that you would have imagined.
Did they have the nuclear material inside of that would eventually go off with the triggering device?
They, again, not exactly clear, but I know that what was in the larger casing was a mixture of conventional explosives and some nuclear material. And that's all they would say is some nuclear material. And we'll talk a little bit about how that came into play in this accident. So here's another picture. The Mark 17 bomb was 24.5 feet long,
wow,
5 feet in diameter, and it weighed 42,000 pounds.
Holy moly.
They called it the Peacemaker.
They call the plane the Peacemaker. The plane's the
Oh,
Peacemaker.
okay. Oh,
Plane was called the Peacemaker.
okay.
I don't know that they ever named a bomb the Peacemaker.
Okay.
That's a definite.
Make a
it's
desert
awesome.
and call it peace.
And then, okay, so I just looked at it. It is a hydrogen bomb. So this is one of the really massive explosions.
So a hydrogen bomb it splits the atom but uses it to kickstart fusion. Is that right? Is that the distinction?
Right.
between a bomb
Yeah,
and a
exactly.
bomb?
So it's got a series of explosives that start a fission reaction that then trigger a fusion reaction, and it's an enormous explosion.
Like Tsar Bomba.
It's the stuff that freaked Oppenheimer out. He was cool with fission, but when it came to hydrogen bombs, he was kind of over it.
It's like Trinity was fun, man. We were just blowing little explosions up, just A-bombs.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, now this slide here, for those on YouTube, shows a B-29. Now, B-29s obviously are famous or infamous, because coming up in August will be another anniversary of the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. But the B-29s were the ones that were used to drop the two bombs or the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
But in this slide, you can see how enormous the B-36 is compared with the B-29. It seems almost that you could fit at least 2, maybe 3 B-29s inside the B-36. Of course, if you disassemble them and put the parts in.
It looks like a toy. It looks like a toy next to it.
Yes. So also you'll notice, for those paying attention at home, watching the slides, the 2 jets have not been installed on this earlier model of the B-36. So it only has the 6 turning without the 4 burning.
You know, that the C-36, it just kind of looks wrong. Like the proportions are wrong somehow. It looks ungainly and almost like a child's drawing of a B-29, way out of scale, way out of proportion.
I agree. In fact, I think they said that the wingspan of a B-36 was longer than the initial powered flight of the Wright brothers.
That's hilarious.
Interesting.
So this photograph is actually of the crew that was bringing the bomb to Albuquerque. Now, this was taken at a different time, but it is the crew of the B-36 that was carrying that bomb. The commander was Lieutenant Colonel Heron and his crew, and this was taken in 1957 at Biggs. And the other crewmen aboard were the co-pilot, Dick Meyer, the radio operator, George Houston, the electronics officer, Jack Resin, and the 25-year-old flight engineer, Jack Williams, and the navigator, Bob Karp. So the flight to Albuquerque was relatively uneventful. In fact, because they wanted to do a twofer, they said, well, on our way to Albuquerque, rather than just fly directly there, they had some maneuvers. They tried out some maneuvers that were part of the training regime. So they had, gotten that done, and they were heading into the Sunport after that short flight. And this slide, for those watching slides, and the red line shows the approximate path of the B-36 in its landing approach. And pilots would recognize this as the standard landing approach of downwind, base, and final. And so they came in from the southwest, approaching the airport runway, the east-west runway, at about a 45-degree angle. It's a pretty standard approach for aircraft. And as they turned a slight right turn to parallel the runways and fly east towards the Sandias, before they made 2 left turns to land on the west-facing runway, 26 is its number. The bomb, well, let me tell you a little bit about how bombs were put in these B-36. they're obvious in some sort of a sling. In fact, the Air Force loved to give acronyms to all sorts of things. So the thing that held the bomb is called the BMS, the Bomb Management System.
Okay.
And so it held the bomb in a kind of a cradle until it was going to be dropped. And of course, the bomb bay doors at the bottom of the plane would open up, and then the bomb would be armed. And then from the cockpit, they would pull a lever and the bomb would be released. The next thing that happened is these bombs actually had a parachute. So they would drop out of the plane and free fall for a ways before nose down, the parachute popped out of the back and it would slow the rate of descent, because nuclear bombs do not go off when they hit the ground.
I see.
They're designed to go off up above the ground at an altitude, and it depends on the bomb makers which one that is. And the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs were that way too. They went off in the atmosphere at 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 feet above the ground. And sorry to say, but the reason for that is because it causes greater damage.
Right.
So the bombs are designed to fall head first and then be slowed by a parachute. But because these bombs are so heavy, 42,000 pounds, the Air Force designed in a fail-safe mechanism. So if the plane in approaching or taking off came into some sort of trouble, the engines didn't work, or the engines on the left side stopped, or anything that threatened the integrity of the flight, there was somebody in the crew had to go back to the bomb, reach over this thing on a catwalk that they had to crawl to get to, and flip this lever that would then allow a mechanical connection through a wire for the pilot to pull a lever, and then the bomb would drop out of the plane. And
Okay.
that was built in intentionally so that the bomb's weight would not make the accident,
Right.
the incident that might be happening be worse.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so as it was standard procedure to do, a member of the crew, and it turns out that it was usually the navigator's responsibility. I don't know why I thought about this for a while, but you know, the navigator tells the pilot, or advises the pilot how to fly to get where they're going. So the assumption is, I guess, that if they're already in sight of the airport, the navigator's not really needed. So he gets to go and do this service.
He's got time for time to check things out. Yeah.
Right. So he crawls back, and I mean crawl. This is a huge plane, but it didn't have, you can't walk straight, you're up, you can't even crawl, you have to kind of crawl on your belly. He goes back to this thing, he reaches over the top of the bomb, he disengages the fail-safe so that the pilot can jettison the bomb should there be a problem. And just as he flips that switch, the bomb falls.
Oh, what
And
happened?
something happened. In the cable may have been snagged or somehow failed. And this is the part that I don't get, because the Freedom of Information didn't allow me to get that yet. I'm still
Oh, that's suspicious. Interesting.
So, but
research that this guy hated Albuquerque.
yeah. So a couple of things happened. First of all, the bomb bay doors weren't open
Okay.
because no one wanted this to happen.
Right.
No one
Right.
anticipated happening. So this 42,000 pounds of metal and explosives just crashed through and just completely destroy the huge bomb bay doors, which are over 30 feet long and like a clamshell, they open out. So that's gone. And as soon as that happens, of course, the sound is tremendous of this bomb going through these doors. So it just rumbles through the whole plane. and immediately everybody knew something had happened.
Can you imagine that poor navigator just watching that happen? Like,
Actually,
Oh,
someone
there
says
you go.
that over the radio, you could hear someone yell, "It wasn't me!" So he immediately defended himself.
Oh, wow.
So, a couple of things.
very suspicious.
You were just right there when it happened. Okay.
The sound happens, the plane is shaking, and the second thing happens, the plane now, unburdened with 21 tons of weight, pops up in the air. It gained 1,000 feet of elevation because it was no longer heavy like it was before.
Wow.
So the pilot makes his adjustments, and he realizes he's not going to be landing right away because these large planes
Because he
need
just
to
dropped a
have-
bomb on it.
well, these large planes need to have calculations that tell them what their approach speed is, what their landing distance is going to be, and a lot of that. So all of this had to be quickly recalculated before they could land minus 42,000 pounds.
Wow.
Now, the bomb came out of the plane, crashed through the doors, and they were so close to the ground. They were about 1,500 feet above the ground. And there wasn't enough time for the parachute to fully deploy. I think it popped out of the back, but it didn't fill up with air, so it didn't slow this thing down. And it hit the ground with a tremendous force. And of course, the conventional explosives in it went off.
I see.
So there was this huge explosion that created a crater 25 feet in diameter and 5 or
Wow.
4 feet deep. And it happened in what is still an undeveloped area of Albuquerque. Imagine if this had fallen on homes.
Now, this is not the part of the base or anything like that. This is just like part of an undeveloped housing area, or
We know it today as Mesa del Sol.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
Mesa del Sol is owned by UNM. So all this property down Mesa del Sol is UNM property.
Right.
Whoa.
It was then, and it still is today.
Now, is this a modern day view of the area? This
Yes.
So it looks like that's pretty undeveloped still.
Yes, it is.
Is there any remnant of any indication of the crater that was once there? They fill it in with a backhoe or something.
Well, I'll get into that, but
all
I
right.
also went, I got the coordinates of where this bomb hit.
Oh, wow.
And using my handheld GPS, I went out to the site and stood in the middle of the crater.
You're the best. You're such a role model to us. I can't
Yeah.
believe you're hunting. It's amazing.
Now, Mike, I you say, Roland, you're such a nerd.
Well, the thing is, we are nerds, and therefore we like nerds.
I think this is amazing.
Yeah.
We're in the nerd groups. So anyway,
Carry on, can't.
so after the bomb dropped, by the way, there was an eyewitness account. A small plane pilot coming from northern New Mexico and with the intentions to landing at the Sunport in 1957 was flying a 2-seat small plane, and he was looking right at this scene, and he said the mushroom cloud that went up was about 2,000, 2,500 feet, and it looked like a mushroom cloud.
Oh my
Because
God.
of course it was, sand and dirt and tree bits and
So he was like, they did just nuke Albuquerque.
so he
Kept
called
flying.
Yeah, he kept flying. He called the tower and he says, "Hey, what's going on there? Are you testing bombs?" And they said, "Stand by. I think we've had some sort of an accident." So they I guess he said it was a big deal. Of course, the Air Force downplayed it. In fact, they lied about this for days.
I believe that. Yeah.
So the bomber, because it was less heavy, it circled around for a while, getting its calculations done for how to land under the new conditions, and finally came in. So maybe it took half an hour for all that to happen. And so the captain who was interviewed later said when they got on the ground and taxied to the site they had been directed to park, there was a whole bunch of staff cars standing there with generals, waiting to talk to them.
I mean, I've had bad days, but I'd imagine that would be a particularly bad day. And you land there and you got your head in your hands and you're like, here they come. I have to explain this.
I know. The nuclear bomb I dropped.
This is the end of my career.
Yeah.
So now, if you're looking at pictures, what you're seeing is the interior of a B-36. And this is the cradle or the universal bombing system that holds it. And there's an arrow on this pointing to the little tiny latch that is at fault for this.
I gotta say, I'm looking at this and I'm not thinking that looks like some sophisticated, but it just looks like a frame with some parts that hold hold something in place, but like it doesn't look particularly technologically, high tech or anything. It's just, it looks like it could hold a giant crate of pumpkins or something just as easily as a nuclear bomb.
Well, you got to remember, this is 1957. So
Dream of such a world.
This is probably the best they could do in 1957.
Yeah, they could make horrific explosive devices that could like blow up whole islands, but they couldn't quite make a thing that could hold it in place so it didn't fall out of the plane.
An adequate latch? Who do you think we are?
We're all about physicists.
Yeah.
So let's see. So the commander, he was afraid that since he kind of figured the bomb had fallen out of the plane, but he was worried that somehow the navigator had gotten trapped or hooked up to the bomb, and he had gone out the door with it. So like he was glad. Pickens. Yeah, he was glad that navigator had said, "I'm still okay." So, and they're going through their interrogations. They actually only talked to the crew for the rest of that day and let them return to Biggsfield that afternoon. And they actually took off the doors to the bomb bay because they were so damaged, they were going to be a drag on the aerodynamics. So they just left a hole there because it didn't have time to do anything else. Jeez. And one last thing was the Air Force person who was supposed to receive the bomb and give them a receipt for it, actually gave them that receipt, but wrote in the comment section, condition unknown.
Right. Just wrote a question mark.
Military humor, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are glad that bomb was not armed, because that could have made a huge error. Now, that bomb, and I've looked at a number of different sources, and they're not clear about how powerful that bomb is. So in some places they said it was 10 megatons, other places they said it was 12 megatons.
This particular bomb.
And so
it killed a cow?
Yeah, the only fatality for the bomb was a cow, because that area had been used as a grazing spot. And so, unfortunately, that cow decided it was going to meet its maker in that way. I don't know. If we were given the chance to be bombed or stunned and have our throat cut, what would you choose?
Maybe the cow saw it plummeting down and kind of moved a little closer, you think?
You mean he moved?
Oh, jeez, Roland. Ouch. Ouch. All right.
End of the show.
No extra charge for him.
Good.
So here's on this slide, for those looking at slides, there's a number of newspaper articles that I found about this. And basically the Air Force declined to get into any detail.
Yeah.
They said, yeah, it was a high explosive operational blockbuster, but we're not allowed to make any further identification and talk about it. So,
I mean, because people had seen the explosion. I mean, if that guy said it was 2,000 feet up in the air, then obviously, like, everybody in Albuquerque who was looking in that direction must have noticed it, and probably everybody heard
Besides,
it.
someone in Roswell just had a baby.
Yeah. A daughter, Brenda Jean, was born Tuesday to Staff Sergeant Mrs. James Seward.
What a different world we live in, where the headlines, the competing headlines was explosion at an Air Force base and girl born in Roswell. Like that could be front page news, both of those things.
In doing historical research and using newspapers, another thing that often floors me is that the newspapers used to put people's addresses.
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
We talked about that.
Joe Smith, not Mike Smith, Joe Smith of 325 Smith Street.
I know. It's like
was broken into, and but good thing his expensive collection of coins was not stolen.
Yeah.
You know, and you go,
You could go visit him and give your condolences.
Yeah, right. Well, if they're not stolen, they're still there. It's treasure.
Yeah, that definitely seems scary. But I guess all our information's online now. So.
Yeah.
So Kirtland continued to obfuscate, and finally just told he's in the public information office, which is the oxymoron, right?
Yeah, right.
They're there to keep things secret, not to give public information.
They're not there. They're there to keep you from finding things out.
We're not allowed to answer these questions.
Wow.
I just want to, could you go back to that slide for a second? Because Air Force comments were that a normal bomb was accidentally dropped. I just thought, it's just a normal bomb, it's just a normal bomb. What's wrong?
Normal what kind of bomb? Oh, just a bomb.
Just a regular bomb.
It was just a small explosion with no property damage.
Everything's
Nobody talked about the cow.
Yeah, nobody mentioned the cow.
The cow is apparently not property because it was damaged.
Yeah. Huh.
It gave its life for its country.
That was 1957. 24 years later, in 1981, I think the journalist submitted a Freedom of Information Act request asking for more information about this bomb drop to be released. And there was a little bit more information given out. However, it took 5 more years, or till 1986, before more and more details. And there was a series of articles that were published in the journal and picked up by numerous papers across the United States, because, you know, it's not just an Albuquerque story now. It's a nuclear bomb dropped on a city.
Yeah, that's a big
deal. So that was something people wanted to know about.
The H bombing of Albuquerque. Beautiful. Yeah. That's the headline here.
Yeah, this is a article in the journal from August 27th. And as Ty says, its title is The H Bombing of Albuquerque. So after that became known, the New Mexico Environmental Department said, you know, we should probably know a little bit more about that.
Now we'll check it out.
They sent their environmental scientist, John Martinez, out there to the site with a Geiger counter to see if there was any residual radiation. Now, in March, I guess it was March or April, I went out there with a Geiger counter and did what John Martinez did, but in 2020.
And?
Well, I'll show you.
Okay. The suspense is killing me. It does
So
says
this,
that it had plutonium in it for sure.
yes.
That article you just showed.
So this is a slide for those looking at the slides, but I took a Geiger counter out there that I borrowed from a UNM professor in nuclear engineering. And I took it out there. I had the coordinates of where the bomb drop had happened from an
Wow.
organization called the Center for Land Use Interpretation in Santa Monica, California. They were interested in this a few years ago, and they actually led a group of artists out to this site, and they actually placed a pole, a 4x4 post, and put a plaque on it, because that's what they're all about, is land use interpretation.
Yeah.
However, in the years since they did that, someone stole it. So anyway, I went out to the site.
Not in Albuquerque.
And you can actually go there. It is not on the Sandia reservation. There's a fence to the east, and you can't go there because of the secret stuff they've got on there. But this is still in the UNM land. And here are 4 pictures I took from the center of the crater. Now, what happened is the Air Force knew that this was a nuclear device, and that they immediately marshaled a special team to go out there with equipment, backhoes, and other earth-moving equipment, and people whose business this is to clear up radioactive material. And so they hauled off a bunch of this dirt, which is now at the campus. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
They buried it, I bet.
Well,
Buried
they
the dirt.
probably took it to a place that, and this is a curiosity I have too. Where did they take that dirt?
Yeah.
I want to see the record. Where did they take it?
Interesting.
They left it, I bet.
They
No,
threw it into Acid Canyon
Dig
in Los
down.
Alamos.
If you go up near Carlsbad or Farmington, those underground testing sites are just left there, and they have like classified material there that could be used for terrorism grade weapons.
But they're also like dozens of feet under the ground.
The book Top Secret New Mexico, or Top Secret Tourism. But
I bet they hauled this off and stuck it in barrels and buried it in the Jemez somewhere.
Maybe. But
By the way,
what about the Church Rock spill on the Rio Puerco? They just left that. It
Well,
was like the biggest nuclear spill ever. Left it.
And I'm forgetting the name of it now, but there is a site in which they were going to fire off nuclear, or they're going to use it to create some sort of energy, and it's down in southeast New Mexico, Carlsbad, something
Gnome
like
site,
that.
yeah.
And it's called Operation something. I can't remember the name of that.
I think Gnome. That's
yeah. That's the one down by Carlsbad, Project Gnome.
Yeah.
And Project Gnome was also Farmington, part of Project Plowshares, the beating our swords into plowshares, like the Bible verse.
Yeah, it was to see if they could release natural gas. It was like a nuclear fracking kind of.
We can make a bay in Alaska. It won't be radioactive forever. All that stuff.
So there is no evidence of it, but if anybody's curious and wants to go out there for themselves, I will give them the coordinates and they can make the trek themselves.
Amazing.
Excellent.
You actually take a dirt road, the road that goes by the drag strip, which is not in use now because of the pandemic. The road that you go by the drag strip, you kind of take this diagonal road that goes southeast northwest, and you drive along it for a couple of miles, and then you have to take a overland trek over this kind of scrub brush to get to the center of it. If you get to the, if you get to this the Sandia fence, you went too far.
Okay, good to know.
So some people in the area know Patrick Nagatani. Have you ever heard of him?
Actually, no.
He was a UNM professor of photography and art, and he did a number of social commentary photographs. His thing was social commentary, and he did a lot of things about how the New Mexico economy is tied in with the nuclear industry. And he called his series of photographs Nuclear Enchantment.
Ooh,
and one of the images that he did is now on the YouTube screen, and this is the actual photo which he took. It's at that site, and then he's got a photo that he took earlier of people and a B-36 flying over, and then he's holding it in the other photograph he's taken. So he took this in 1978.
I love it.
Now, was he there when a B-36 or a C-36?
A B-36, no,
B-36.
he was a master of compositing. So
Okay.
he photoshopped that plane into the scene.
Wow. It's a beautiful image there.
I was privileged to have met Patrick Nagatani in my membership with the Enchanted Lens Camera Club. We had him come and do a judging of our members' photos one time and talk a little bit about his career. But he was already, when he did this, he was already pretty ill, and it was kind of sad to see him. He was kind of a shell of his former self, but it was nice to have met somebody. So
wow.
That's the end of the nuclear bomb drop.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank
what?
you so much
That's
for
my
that
question. What? How?
Yeah.
That's
Also,
cool.
they're not lying anymore about anything else, right? Like that was just something they used to do.
They stopped lying after that.
Yeah.
They learned their lesson. They were like,
57. In 1958, they said, "Look, it's 1958. We got to stop lying.
You gotta stop lying, you guys."
Yeah.
So the 24 million gallon fuel spill that was previously said to be 8 million gallons that was previously said to not exist, that's totally on the level now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. It just keeps going up and down.
Yeah.
Well, and about that fuel spill, I think it's not so much lying as the fact that they just don't know.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. Like, what I've read about their ability to kind of judge that sort of thing
Interesting.
It's
leaves
very
something
difficult.
to be desired.
Anytime you're digging around underground, the ground is not uniform. You know, there's pockets of all sorts of things going on down there. And so if you drill a hole in one place and you drill a hole 5 feet over, you may find completely different conditions. It's that old story of blind people trying to describe an elephant.
Right.
And depending on whether they're touching the leg or the tail or the trunk, you know, they're going to give different descriptions. So it turns out that very, very soon, or within days of the accidental bomb drop, there was another military accident. And it involved a guy named Edwin Boggy. And he had to eject from his burning jet at 40,000 feet. And he landed, his ejection seat worked perfectly. The parachute opened, and he landed near Las Lunas. And the plane crashed. And all I could find from the newspaper is the plane crashed 25 miles south of Albuquerque. That's all the description. And of course, I want to know what was the address of the street that it crashed into. And no one's ever mentioned it. So I don't know. I'm very curious to go to that site and see what's there.
Yeah.
That's why we're kindred spirits here, because you want to know, like, the street. You want to go stand in the empty field where the bomb was.
We're all about
I was
that.
looking at that picture of the crater site, and there's nothing to see there at all. And yet I want to go and stand there too. Like it takes a special kind of person, and you're definitely one of us.
So anyway, here's and maybe most people who haven't jumped out of an airplane at 40,000 feet don't know. First of all, you cannot breathe. Well, you can breathe, but not very well at any altitude above 10,000 feet.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
When you're flying in a private plane that has the ability to go over 10,000 feet, one of two things happens. One, it has a pressurized cabin that can force the pressure up so that it appears not to be 10,000 feet. Or if that's too expensive or the plane does not come in that option, then you have to wear an oxygen mask. So anything above 10,000, you can't breathe normally.
Right.
Plus, it's cold. We're talking about tens of degrees below zero at that altitude. And so if you jump out of a plane or if you eject from a plane at that altitude, you've got two things to worry about: how cold it is and whether or not you can breathe. Now, fortunately, military jet pilots usually have those oxygen masks over their face all the time. Even though the plane may have oxygen in it, they wear that. So when they're bailing out, they have a tank that's with the ejection seat that will give them enough oxygen to come down. But, you're wearing clothes that, will keep you warm here on a winter day when it's 20 degrees or 10 degrees. But when it's minus 30 or minus 40, if you don't get down to warmer altitudes pretty fast, you could actually have freeze a limb or something. So he was fortunate. He got out, and I think, and I don't know this, I'm just making this up. I think when you eject from a plane like that, the parachute does not open right away. You free fall for quite some distance to get out of that altitude, and then the parachute, there's an altitude device on there that says you're low, and then it pops out to slow down your fall.
That sounds right. You may have been making it up, but I believe you.
Yeah, you wouldn't want your parachute to immediately get stuck in the wheels or something.
So here for the YouTube people is a picture of an F-86 Saberjet, not the one, because it burned and blew up and crashed, but this is what they look like. And to me, as I was growing up as a kid, this was a jet fighter. I was going to say
it's got a classic look to it for sure.
Yeah, that's what I remember. The big air intake in the front that kind of looks like a nose, mouth, and then swept back wings. Very cool. This is a restored one. So here's the next one. A crash of another F-86. And then, these planes came in all sorts of versions. The first one was the F-86. And then they came out with the A model, the B model, the C model, the D model. Every time they did some sort of an improvement, they gave it another suffix.
Because they were going for the collector's market.
Yes, that's right. So this is an F-86D for those who paid attention and cared. This happened July 8th and 9th. And you say, well, wait a minute, was it the 8th or the 9th? And we'll find out why I said that. So 3 F-86 were out practicing night formation flying out of the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base near Tucson. Now, people might not know that by its name, but the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base is where they mothball all the planes out on the desert.
Oh, that's the graveyard, right? The airplane graveyard,
and
Air Force graveyard.
You can actually go there and visit those planes. They take you around in a golf cart or a van. They won't let you get out and wander, but you can drive down the aisles of these planes.
You can't get in one.
No, you can't get in.
Damn.
So in this training flight, apparently they needed it because there was some confusion about what plane was going to be on the right. So at 24,000 feet of elevation, one of the pilots, Lieutenant Van Fleet, bumped Lieutenant Onyate's plane, causing both of the planes to become uncontrollable. The flight leader, who was flying away from them, he saw the collision and ordered both pilots to immediately eject, not believing that they could, pull it out of whatever configuration it was in. So the pilots ejected, and they both landed about a half a mile from each other on the other side, on either side of a steep, densely wooded canyon.
Wow.
So as it would happen, as luck would have it, as you say,
Uh-huh.
there was a thunderstorm that night.
Oh.
And so the pilots couldn't be rescued until the next morning. Lieutenant Van Fleet's plane crashed near Mount Bigelow in Arizona, northeast of Tucson, and that crash was found right away. But Lieutenant Oñate's plane disappeared.
Mm.
Now, do you have the sound effects for Twilight Zone? They need to be inserted here. There you go.
All
Great.
right.
That was perfect. 3 months later, a rancher near Truth or Consequences called the Air Force and asked them why a crashed airplane was on his grazing land and to get it the hell off.
I like how that's framed. Like, why is this airplane out here? You get it out of here.
It's on my land. I
And it
didn't
took-
give you permission to crash here.
It took him 3 months to notice it. The guy must have had a big ranch.
I think I met that rancher when I was out at Sierra Leone.
So they think that amazingly, the plane's autopilot corrected the attitude of the plane after he jumped out, and it continued flying east until it ran out of fuel.
It just kept
In New
going.
Mexico.
Wow.
350 miles it flew on its own.
I think that autopilot deserves a medal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's
for
impressive.
those YouTube folks, here's kind of a map of approximately how it went from Mount Bigelow near Tucson all the way to
a straight line.
I know Mount Bigelow.
Whoops.
Oop.
Here we go.
Here we go.
Next one.
Strato Fortress.
The B-52B. You know, if they don't have a suffix, I'd be suspicious that they were Chinese knockoffs.
Could be. Well, that was too early for that, though. You could probably get one off of Wish now, though.
Yeah, or offer up. So this is the B-52 Stratofortress. It was the 1961 updated model of the B-36. It was designed by the Strategic Air Command. And in essence, planes like this flew all around the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, ready to go wherever they were needed. It was crazy. How we defended our country before there were missiles.
And a major plot point in Dr. Strangelove.
Yes. So this is April 7th in 1961, and this crew of the B-52 was ordered to participate in a training flight for some New Mexico Air National Guard pilots flying jet fighters. It was to play the target. It was to pretend that it was a enemy bomber that had penetrated our airspace, and the Air National Guard was going to go out there, find it, and shoot it down. And so they used ground radar stations to help them steer towards it. It was a training exercise of how to accomplish this. That particular plane was also on a big field in El Paso, and they had named this plane the Ciudad Juarez in honor of El Paso's sister city across the border.
That's kind of nice.
So the plane, the bomber had a specific navigated run that it was supposed to go on that was not told to the ground radar controllers. So they were on alert to try and see if they could spot it. And the plane was using, I don't know this for sure, but I'm sure it was using some sort of navigating jamming equipment to try and make it difficult for them to seek it. Right. So the two planes from the Air National Guard were the F-100 Super Sabres. It was the next version of the F-86. So they had made 5 runs at this bomber by that time and had electronically shot it down 5 times. So the two fighter pilots said, we're getting low on fuel. It's time to go back to the barn. And they said, we've got enough for one more run. Let's do a number 6. So they maneuvered around and got in line, and the approach was to come at it from the backside and shoot heat-seeking missiles, which would which would be attracted by the exhaust from the jets of the bomber. And so they came up from behind it because they can go faster than the bomber. They came up, and then a certain distance, they pressed the button that would register the electronic kill, and swoosh, off went a missile.
So they pushed the wrong button?
Nope. I'll tell
that
you
was
that
the right
later.
button.
It's like the pills in the Matrix. Do not take the green pill.
Oh no! Oh, people died.
Oh, the B-52, it hit the inboard left engine, causing the left wing to come off, which caused the plane to go into a violent spin where it was rotating around the wing that was not there. And it was very difficult. The centripetal forces to try and get out of that thing were tough. So some were able to eject, especially the pilot and co-pilot that had actual ejection seats. But some of the crew in the back, like the gunners or the navigators and other people, they didn't have ejection seats. They had to open a hatch and fall out, and it was just too much forces, so they were not able to get out.
Oh, those poor guys.
So on the day of, guess what? Remember, we had a thunderstorm on the other training exercise. So this day there was a snowstorm. It's April, but it's snowing over by Mount Taylor where this happened.
Yeah.
So Captain George Jackson, Donald Blodgett, and Raymond Singleton all were able to eject and were rescued that very day. But because of the snowstorm, 2 that ejected had to wait overnight in freezing conditions. Captain Ray Obel and Manuel Mieres of Flagstaff, who was the crew chief, he had to wait. And waiting, and because of his injuries, he ended up losing his left leg. The others were relatively okay. They recovered from their injuries. Unfortunately, 3 of the crew members did not survive: Stephen Carter, Glenn Baer, and Peter Generis.
Wow.
Peter Generis actually was from Albuquerque, even though he was in the Air Force down in El Paso. And he is buried in Fairview Cemetery, and I found his grave.
Is he in the old section or the new section?
He's in the new section.
The new section. Okay.
So the 2 pilots that were involved in this were a gentleman named Lieutenant Van Syak and Captain Dale Dodd. And it was the missile was fired from Van Syak's plane. Now, Van Syak he had over 1,900 hours in jets and over 1,000 hours in the specific F-100, and had been with the Air National Guard for 30 months. He was their safety officer.
Oh dear.
And he had written a number of operational procedures for these air-to-air missile training and firing exercises. And so obviously the Air Force was wondering, how is it that our training officer ended up doing that? Well, it turns out that they discovered a problem with the mount of the missile to the F-100. It was not airtight, and moisture could get in a certain place, and then it caused a short, allowing the missile to be fired. And they then immediately, after this accident, they immediately stopped all training exercises, and then they discovered this water problem, fixed it, and then all planes now had that modification.
But they didn't it just seems to me like, why would you have a live missile on it for a training exercise?
That's a great question. I had that myself, and I came to this conclusion, but I made it all up. See if you can.
Okay. Let's see if Matches the parachute theory.
Remember, it's 1961. We're in the middle of the Cold War.
Uh-huh.
And while they're training how to attack bombers that might come into our airspace, there was always the thought that they might actually come into the airspace.
Like, need to be ready.
Right. So they needed to be ready with real missiles, even if they were out on a train exercise. Does that sound plausible?
It sounds like something that the Air Force might have thought was plausible. How about that?
I should see if I can get a job with the Public Information Service.
I have good reasons why bad things happen.
So about a year later, he had been cleared of this accident. And about a year later, here in New Mexico, at the Presbyterian Church on Carlisle and Central, he married Miss Marjorie Denton, and they were married for the rest of his life. He died at the age of 80 in 2014. So he had a good life.
I hope he didn't feel too bad about such a terrible thing happening.
Well, I'm sure he felt bad about it, but
I'm sure he did feel bad, but not too bad. I mean, like.
Well, it wasn't him.
Yeah, exactly. But
right. Still, yeah, that's a horrible thing to be involved in.
All right.
So
I'll be right back.
Here's the next crash. This involved a B-36 again. By the way, these are not in chronological order. I'm sorry, I should have probably done that. This was in 1951. This was actually 6 years prior to the accidental bomb drop. Now, B-36s were coming and going from Kirtland Air Force Base all the time. If you grew up in the late 40s, early 50s, I've heard from people who did, and they said that they loved the sound of this. It was so distinctive that they just would stop what they were doing when they would hear a B-36 and just take it all in, like,
believe it.
Wow, that is weird. That is amazing.
So it's a really unique sound, or?
Oh yeah, with those 6 powerful engines, I'm sure that it probably would rumble your insides if you were near.
Just such a massive thing to look up at.
Right. It'd be like listening to local Albuquerque band Chichara. Just 3 basses.
I like that you thought of that. I thought of, in Seabrook, Texas, the mosquito trucks spraying poison in the air every summer evening, which was a super nostalgic thing for me.
Interesting.
It's probably going to kill me one day with
you and Terrence Malick in the Tree of Life.
Yeah, there you go.
So this B-36 that crashed at Kirtland was out of Carswell Air Force Base in Texas, and it was coming to Kirtland. By the way, they came into Kirtland all the time because Kirtland was the Air Force's nuclear base. And so there were any number of modifications and changes and things that they needed to do to the airplanes to accommodate the different nuclear bombs as they progressed and evolved, including that universal bombing system. And so they were messing with those all the time. So the planes would fly in, they would work on them, and then they'd fly back to Carswell Air Force Base. So this plane was coming in, pretty routine, nothing special. It's going to land on runway 8, which is the one that goes to the east. So it's the one most used by the commercial planes when they before they stop flying for the pandemic. It's coming in over the east, so it's over the city, flying over Rio Grande, coming into the east. And it's a pretty strong crosswind day this happens. Again, this is May, so we're in our windy period.
Right.
They say the gusts were up to 35 knots. And of course, this is a huge plane, so crosswinds are going to give it a bad time.
Yeah.
So after passing over the end of the runway at about 200 feet, so they're almost there, the right wing dipped and it hit the outboard engine's prop. Remember, there's 6 of them, so there's 3 on one wing. And the prop hits the ground, the nose pitched up, and then the plane cartwheeled. which means that
Gosh.
it's going sideways down the runway, wing over wing over wing.
Oh,
Whoa.
It was
man, what a
huge
nightmare.
I don't think I've seen
explosion
that in a movie.
fire. 23 airmen died in this.
Oh, that's awful.
That's huge. That's a
Only 2 aboard the plane survived, and that was Captain Richard Fogwell and Staff Sergeant Jack Erickson. 23 died. And you'd say, wait a minute, that seems like a lot of people for a bomb crew. And it was. These people were coming in for a class. This was on a Sunday, and they were coming in for a class that was going to start the next Monday and go for a week before they would go back to Carswell. So they were just riding it like they would ride a plane.
Yeah.
This is truly suppressed history, I feel like. I've never heard of this. Like, this is a huge mass death event. I mean,
well, and it makes me wonder, like, how many, like, Air Force or armed forces enlisted people die in peacetime. I mean, it must be a pretty significant number even now.
So I won't list all the passengers, but the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, flight engineer, radar operator, all on the crew died, and that was 9 people that were really a part of the bomb crew. And then the rest were the passengers coming to that class the next day. So that was really sad. And I had the same reaction you did, is I had never heard of this.
Yeah.
And I've been in Albuquerque now for 20 years. So it seems to me like something that might have come up by accident sometime. Oh, that's a bad pun. It might have come up without anybody really meaning to do it. I would just read it somewhere, but I stumbled upon it in my research about military accidents. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have known it.
Never heard of it. Like, that is a
it's
significant
more than the
amount of
TWA
people.
crash.
Yeah,
so
it's like twice as many.
So here is couple of interesting twists with this particular crash. It turned out that an engineer, another military nerd named Alan Hazard, had a habit of going down to Kirtland Air Force Base and filming planes landing. And he was there that Sunday. He was off. This was his hobby. And so he had good photographic equipment. It didn't say, but I'll bet you it was a 16 millimeter professional camera for that time. And he was filming this approach and crash. And he got excellent film of it. So Air Force wanted to get it immediately. He brought it to them the day of the crash and said, you may want this. They took it, developed it for him, and then gave it back to him. He actually sold that to Life magazine for $500.
Really?
And they took some images out of it and published a couple of pages about it. Now, I tried to get a hold of that. It was the May 1951 edition, but you have to, it was more work to try and find it.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
These Life magazine page by pages are not on the internet.
Right.
Because they will sell you reproductions.
Sure.
And so
the Antique Mall used to have a bunch.
Well, if anybody knows where a May 1951 edition of Life is, tell me, get in touch with me. I will definitely buy it from you.
And there must be the film must still exist somewhere, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Wow. There's a Kirtland Air Force Base Historical Society. I know that.
Yeah. Not that I necessarily want to watch a film of that, but I don't know. Kind of.
Alan Hazard, he went on as an engineer to work for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratories in California, JPL. It has a very great reputation. In fact, in the, I think in the Big Bang Theory, the scientists in that comedy actually work at JPL.
Oh, okay.
Well, he was the senior development engineer in the missile engineering section. However, he did some other things. And for those watching the YouTube, there is a spacesuit that he developed for use by astronauts on the moon.
Don't say
And,
it's
Which they
pretty
use
ridiculous.
and of course, in 1951, it was
Yeah.
probably
It would have been
8
so
feet
funny.
apart.
It's
But,
pretty far off. You know,
it looks ridiculous today.
it's
And
like 4 times wider than the guy.
yeah, and it has a windshield around him in 360 degrees. I don't know. I don't even know anything that's like it I could describe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure it was
so-
like instrumental in the development of spacesuits, but man, it's hilarious.
It looks like of an air control tower. Yeah.
well, it's and we look at it today from the eyes of 2020, and we say this is ridiculous.
Good Lord.
It's suitable for a comedy.
Maybe, yeah.
And
It would be too over the top for a comedy.
And guess what?
Hmm.
I watched Steve Carroll in Netflix's Space Force, and in that Space Force is about the Space Force,
You're right.
and Steve Carroll goes out on this a training mission in which he's in the desert, but they pretend that it's in the moon, and he has to wear a moon suit. And I swear, if you're looking at this picture on YouTube, to me that looks like Alan Hazard's design.
Right. It's similar. Like I said, the actual design would have been too over the top for the show, Space Force, but this clearly, I'd say it has some lineage there.
So on to our next one, also in 1951, and it is another B-36. So another thing I learned in this research is that how many B-36s were landing at Kirtland Air Force Base?
Pretty common, which I guess makes sense if it's the nuclear warehouse of the nation.
In 1951, I was in November of that year, so just around the time of this crash, I would have turned 3.
Oh.
So I wasn't interested in the military in 1950.
You liked cows and horses.
Lone Ranger was my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
So this B-36 had a crew of 12, and they had been temporarily stationed at Kirtland for experiments and various trainings. And they were coming in that evening after a day's flight. It was about 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening in October, nothing special. When the crew realized their main gear was not coming down. They were not getting the indication in the cockpit that the gear was down. And so they had a problem. Yeah. So the pilot circled until they had gas, so they just circled until they tried everything they could to try and get the gear to drop. They also needed to burn up any excess fuel in case they did end up crashing. They didn't want to fire. And so finally, they just weren't successful in getting the gear down. And the commander, the pilot in command, gave the order for everybody but the flight engineer and himself to bail out of the plane because he didn't know how this crash was going to work out. And they might be killed in coming in.
Right.
However, the co-pilot asked to stay and to help bring it down, so he was allowed to stay. So 3 stayed in, and 9 crew members jumped from the ship over Albuquerque. Again, October 18th, 1951, you have 9 parachutes opening over the city. So the giant 179-ton plane made its approach as it would if it had wheels, and finally came down and skidded on its belly to a stop on the east-west runway, and was quickly surrounded by emergency personnel, and there was no fire.
I bet that was a hell of a noise. That thing skidding
and sparks.
Fingernails on blackboards for a mile.
So there were a few injuries for the 9 that had bailed out, but they were okay. And the three who stayed aboard had no injuries whatsoever.
That's fantastic. This is my favorite story, other than the bomb dropping, because nobody got hurt.
So this was actually the first time that a B-36 had landed without landing gear. So Albuquerque's first. Please mention this whenever you're talking about Albuquerque's first.
That's right. Okay.
The pilot was praised for his skill and cool demeanor under pressure, and the newspaper came out and took a bunch of pictures of this. Now, it turns out, this is back in the day when everybody smoked and nobody thought anything about it. And so all three scrambled from the aircraft in a ladder brought over by the fire department, because obviously climbing out the cockpit window was not standard procedure. Right. So they climbed out, caught down the ladder. They were standing there kind of, I guess, assessing how lucky they really were. And finally, one of the co-pilots said, "Oh, shoot, I left my cigarettes in the cockpit." So he climbed back up on the ladder and got his cigarettes.
A nation of hapless addicts.
Well, it kind of showed to me that, yeah, you're an addict, but also, just another day as a pilot of a B.
Right.
That was just like that generation, though. They just like unflappable.
Yeah. Unflappable. My flaps are out all the time.
Exactly. Nothing but flaps over here.
Yeah, I am very flappable. So the next one is we've left the B-36s now, and we're now a year later, 1952. So there were two crashes in 51 that I know of. There might be others I haven't found out yet. This one is in 52, and it was a B-47. Now, the B-36 had a pretty straight wing. It didn't have the swept back wing, and of course it was still a prop plane. So between then and the B-47, which was much smaller, but it had a different mission, it was all jets.
That's all jets on it. It's like 6 jets on it.
Yeah, it had 6 total jets, and it had this thing in it, and you can see in this picture, for those who are lucky enough to be looking at pictures, it had something called the JATO, or the Jet Assisted Takeoff, in which these extra jets came out from behind the plane and just fired these rockets off, and they only used them on takeoffs because they didn't need them on landings, but they needed that extra oomph to get off the ground. So it was called a JATO, or a Jet Assisted Takeoff. And this B-47, numbered 50-026 on Wednesday, March 26th, crashed while taking off and using the JATO system. And they're not, I couldn't find any reason or crash analysis that said what may have caused the crash. Right. But I'm sure, having been a pilot, not a jet pilot, but when you put forces on a plane that are not necessarily coming from the engines under the wing, I'm sure that it changes the dynamic of the plane, and you have to be ready to adjust in terms of the controls to be able to take care of that. It would seem to me that if the JATO went off and you weren't ready for it, it could cause the accident.
Right. So maybe it's just a matter of like kind of not catching it at the right time or something. Oh, so and this killed people too, huh?
This killed everybody aboard, actually. You know, the B-36 had a big crew, 9 to 12 people on this thing. But as the planes got more modern, they used less people. So this bomber only had 4, a crew of 4. So unfortunately, it crashed and killed all those people. And they were all from Albuquerque, which is kind of unfortunately significant about this particular crash. The pilot was Arthur Zalk. The co-pilot was Francis Early. And these guys were in their 30s. A first lieutenant was aboard, Chester Thew, T-H-E-W. He was 40. He lived at 1504 Hermosa Southeast in the Southeast Heights.
Yeah.
And Master Sergeant Alan Witt was 29, and he was from 1322 Lafayette Northeast. And 1504 Hermosa, no, I get, yeah, 1504 Hermosa, I think, are in those buildings that are off of Gibson, I think, that are base buildings.
Okay.
Now we think of
That
them
makes
as
sense.
base buildings.
Yeah. That's so weird. It's the publishing of the addresses. It's like, well, we could go visit them now, go visit the house and knock on the door and tell the current residents this story.
And this also, besides the 4 Albuquerqueans who were killed in the crash, it had another Albuquerquean involved, and that's a guy named Peter Shaka. He was the fire chief of Kirtland at the time, and he was quite well known to Albuquerqueans at that time because he was a member of the UNM Lobo team that beat Texas Tech in 1940.
This is like the only time that's ever happened, is that?
Yeah, I think so.
In 100 years of Lobos?
Yeah.
Crazy.
So he was a hero in this, trying to drag 2 people out of the burning wreckage.
Yeah.
And he was successful, but they did not survive.
Mm.
So now we're going to talk about the crash of a B-29. Now, as I said earlier, these are not in chronological order. So we're going to go back to 1947, 10 years before the atomic bomb drop. So this is a B-29, the same one that was used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this is just after the war.
Yeah.
This is on a Monday in January, and 11 died in this crash. And this one is sort of interesting. This plane was taking off from Kirtland, and it was using the runway that kind of, it's not the east-west runway, but it's the runway that goes northeast, southwest. And so it took off to the south and apparently did not gain elevation. Something happened. It just didn't, it wasn't able to fly, and it fell out of the sky after leaving the runway, and it crashed into the Tijeras Arroyo.
Okay.
This plane was carrying what was described in the papers as restricted experimental equipment.
Aliens.
So immediately after crashing, crews went out there along with MPs and state police officers to keep people away from it until the restricted experimental equipment could be removed. They think, investigators thought that maybe 2 of the 4 engines had caught fire during the takeoff roll, and it just couldn't climb. Unfortunately, and talking about wanting to be at the site where something happened,
Right.
it is slightly possible that there are some pieces of this wreckage still in the Tijeras Arroyo, right close to where I-25 crosses.
And is that that looks like that's outside of Kirtland Air Force Base, so that would be accessible land, probably, huh?
Yes. You could go there. In fact, Tijeras Arroyo is one of the strong drainage arroyos in town, and I think Bernalillo County or Amafka owns that property, and you can get there easy.
So you get some 70-year-old restricted experimental equipment, maybe.
Well, who has who has a metal detector?
I do.
Yeah, there are parts of Tijeras Canyon that are on baseland that you can't get to. Like I tried to walk the length of it with friends.
This is Tijeras Arroyo.
Oh, isn't that the same thing? It's just as it goes through city?
I don't think so. I'm looking at it here. Is it?
This is very close to where I-25 crosses over it.
Yeah. So no, this is a ways away.
You know where University now crosses the Arroyo and goes down to Mesa del Sol?
Yeah.
It's between
I wonder if it's
University
connected.
and I-25.
It's all that kind of wasteland area.
I bet it goes all the way to Terrace Canyon. Why else would it be called that?
I don't know. Maybe somebody found scissors there once.
Oh, Tierras Arroyo goes all the way into the canyon.
Oh, it does?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, Eric Mann had a truck garden out there, and he built a dam across Tierras Creek, right by where the Little Beavertown area is. If you climb down to Tierras Creek down there, you'll see the remnants of his concrete dam.
He had a dam down there.
Yeah, Emu Man, he built that.
Oh, okay.
That's a story we should chase.
We should get into that at some point. But
I know where that is. I can take you there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Let me take you there. Isn't there a song that goes there?
Sounds probably. I'm pretty sure my mother sings it from time to time.
Oh, you're putting me and your mother in the same generation, aren't you?
I think you're literally the same generation.
So I've got a slide here that lists names of all 11 who were killed. And some of these folks are actually buried in Fairview too. Joseph Sadler and Francis Podleski. He was actually pulled from the wreckage alive, but died at Veterans Hospital where they took him at the time. Veterans Hospital was there in 1947, but it
one on Gibson.
Yeah.
A few more burials in Fairview.
You guys know about Find a Grave, right?
Oh yeah, I've encountered it many a time.
Yeah.
So that's how I used Find a Grave to find these guys and where they are. And on Memorial Day, I took flags out and put them on their graves.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's a good thing to do.
That's cool. Good to remember people.
So we talked a little bit about luck earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And on that plane that crashed in the Tierras Arroyo, 2 of the normal crew were not aboard the flight that day. I couldn't find out why they weren't. Were they on leave? Did they not make it to the flight? I assume they were given permission to not be aboard the flight, but they weren't. And so they survived and, went on to have families and live their lives.
Yeah. Hopefully
so here's another B-29. And I learned a new term. There's certain versions of the B-29 which were called silver plate B-29s. Okay. And in the picture that the YouTube folks can see, this plane is silver, but that's not the reason for it. They gave the code name silver plate to the B-29s that were dedicated to carry nuclear weapons.
Oh.
So when you hear B-29 silver plate, you know that it was designed or it was outfitted to carry nuclear weapons. This one happened on a Tuesday, April the 11th of 1950.
Did they have, so it had nuclear material with it, or?
They don't actually tell you that.
Oh.
I assume that they would have.
It didn't make a 25-foot crater.
No. It took off at 9:38 p.m., so it was a nighttime crash. And it crashed 3 minutes after takeoff. Now, they were taking off to the east, and it hit the ground in those low hills we know of as Four Hills.
The Four Hills.
Okay. And the crash site is, they say, 6 miles east of Kirtland. And I guess the Four Hills are considered part of the Manzano Mountains because that's what they identified the crash site.
Technically Manzanitas, right?
Is that right?
Maybe, because there were tiny ones.
Yeah.
And again, this slide for the YouTubers show what my best guess is for the flight plan. It took off from Kirtland and tried to gain altitude and struggled, but just couldn't gain any altitude. And at night, they ended up hitting the peaks of the Four Hills right there.
Wow.
Boom.
Huh.
So this one also had some secret stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So people were barred from visiting it. Now, this did crash into what was then and is now the base. And so
Okay.
public was not allowed in there anyway.
Nobody from the news.
13 airmen were killed in this crash. And so to answer Mike's question, they had special crews sent to remove any nuclear material and secret equipment.
Interesting. So there theoretically could have been 2 or more bombs that were,
Yeah.
you know.
But the Air Force, again, pillars of the community and truthful at all times, said that this flight was a routine navigation training flight.
It was normal. It was a normal flight.
And it's normal for navigation training to carry a nuclear weapon.
That's right.
The aircraft commander was from Frankfort, Illinois, John Robert Martin, and Lieutenant Thomas Stultz was the pilot. Actually, the commander often doesn't fly. The co-pilot, which we would call, is actually the pilot because of how the Air Force designates those. Now,
so it was definitely a broken arrow.
yes. I did not mention that. Thanks for bringing that up. All accidents involving nuclear bombs, whether they go off or not, are classified in general as broken arrows. And so the accidental bomb drop is a broken arrow. And then this was a broken arrow also because the bomb that was in this plane was a Mark IV, which is a variant of the Mark III Fat Man that was used on Nagasaki.
And fun fact, my grandfather was recruited by Los Alamos National Labs to work on triggering devices for Mark IVs. So it's because of this bomb that I live in Albuquerque, basically.
That is an interesting connection.
Yeah.
I would never have met you, Ty, if not for
this bomb.
Nuclear bombs. So at all of these sites, there's really no plaque, no notice, no enduring memorial to these. Like Mike said, I would have never known. You'd think that a crash that killed 23 people at our international airport would have some acknowledgement somewhere in it to honor those folks. But no, nothing, except this one that happened on April the 11th, what did I say, 50, I gotta go back to the slide. 1950. It did have a memorial. Since it was on the base, I guess, some of the military people on the base decided to make a memorial stone outcropping that memorialized the crash site, and they invited the survivors or the families of the people who were killed on that flight to come to Albuquerque and to participate in the dedication of this site on April the 11th, 2019. Now, it's interesting that they did it on 2019, which was not a major 10 or 5 anniversary, but if they hadn't done it then, it would have been April the 11th, 2020, and they couldn't have done it because of COVID.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I was thinking, like, the TWA crash has a memorial at the Sunport. It's bizarre to me that there's not memorials for some of this other stuff there.
I wonder if there is a memorial. I just thought about this, but it's on the base and not in the commercial airport.
Yeah,
that could be.
I have to. By the way, I have had the dickens of a time trying to get a hold of anybody at Kirtland's Public Information. They do not answer the phones.
Yeah,
they don't answer emails either.
But here's a fun thing to do. Take a right turn on Louisiana or somewhere that has one of the gates, and accidentally drive into the gate at Kirtland. It's a whole thing. It's a good time for everyone. They get to, there's a guy who comes out with a gun and he stands in front of your car and he tells you how you've got to drive out exactly, and he has to walk in front of you the whole time, and it's a good time.
You're giving me bad memories, Ty. You're resurrecting unpleasant experiences.
I can't say that I've done that, and I would say right now I probably won't do that.
Well, you should.
I have just purchased, it's less than 2 weeks old, a Tesla Model Y. And for thrills, I just go out on the freeway and stomp on the accelerator, and it shoves me in the back of my seat, and I feel like I'm in Knott's Berry Farm.
That sounds pretty good too, yeah. But you could take it on the base and then stomp on the accelerator and just see what happens. Just see what happens.
I think Teslas are pretty good, but they're not bulletproof. Well, the Cybertruck may be, but not my car.
Except his demo model.
Yeah.
So this slide here is, I'm wrapping it up now, and this slide here, for people that were interested in this talk and want to see what a B-29 silver plate looks like, it's parked right outside of the Nuclear Museum. And so you can actually see a B-52 that was shot down and a B-20 or a B-29. And in the back of this slide, way in the back behind the B-52, up against the fence, is the Mark 17 hydrogen bomb.
Yeah. And I have to honestly say, the back lot at the Nuclear Museum, where all those planes are, that's one of my favorite things to do in Albuquerque. I'm not that into the rest of the museum. I kind of find it a little thrown together. But the back lot is just, it's these huge vehicles and old models of Mark 17 bombs and things just sitting around. And there's something sort of it feels a little DIY in a way about it. And I like wandering around there.
And it has the sail from a nuclear submarine.
That's right. Yes, it does.
And I found that in Congress to have that sitting out crusher fine.
Rising out of the dirt. It's like there's a nuclear submarine under the dirt there.
I was in Alamogordo a few months ago, and I was just like walking around some cool old silos I wanted to take pictures of, and there were just like military stuff everywhere. There were like plane parts and things that looked like bombs and stuff, just like sitting in a gated little area by the main road.
If you go to Santa Rosa, there is an old tank just sitting in the middle of the grassy area of a freeway on-ramp. You can totally just get out and go sit in the tank if you want. There's nothing there to stop you from doing that. It's just
I know the one you're talking about. There's also a tank in just some random backyard in Vaughan.
Oh, okay.
I read a Tribune piece about it like 20 years ago. But this is amazing, Roland. So
thank
cool,
you for
man.
sharing this stuff.
What a great, put together, well-researched, extensive. You could get a book out of this.
You probably could. I know you could. You could definitely do it.
Oh yeah. What are your takeaways? Like, people need to be more careful. Like, a lot of accidents. You guys ever land?
Be more careful. Safety first.
Well, I think Ty touched upon it, and that is how many of our military die in peacetime accidents.
Nothing to do with fighting.
Yeah. Well, they have to do with training for fighting, I guess. Because I don't think anybody ever assembles 12 people and say, hey, what do you think? It's a nice day to go flying. Let's hop in that B-47 and take a trip.
Good point.
I had a friend that was in the military, and everything is scripted with them. It's like, okay, we're going to take off at this time. We're going to do this. We're going to go that far. We're going to at this speed, and then we're going to at this point turn left. And so, it's not like out for a Sunday fly.
It's like a hidden cost of militarization that you just never really think that much about, Like, people die all the time in situations that aren't war or battle.
Well, and we don't think of it much because we're thinking about pandemic all the time. But now, there are bad actors out in the world that could take advantage. Might even take advantage of a pandemic and decide to attack or do something. And so the one thing I would say about the military is they are very good at fighting the war we had last time.
Yeah, that's true, right? That's what they say.
So,
they don't need 60% of our federal budget. I know that.
Yeah. It's like World War I. They said, okay, this is how war is. So they prepared between World War I and World War II.
We need a lot of horses.
World War I again. But
Yeah.
they realized that wasn't going to work. They needed to do something different. And we're
Maginot
surprised.
Line.
It's also like taking off your shoes at the airport. One time, an idiot thought he could light his shoes on fire. And now for a decade, we take our shoes off at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been done. You know, terrorists move on. They go, well, the shoe thing didn't work. Let's do something else. But we're still checking shoes.
Right.
Interesting.
I want to know more about this Mark IV bomb that got dropped out there. I'd love to know kind of the inside scoop on what the secret experimental stuff was that they had involved with
I'll bet you
crashes.
Well, first of all, a lot of military accidents are kept secret for 50 years.
Yeah, just routinely.
Yeah, and
Like
then
census data.
the catch-22. Because these accidents were over 50 years old, I was told by someone in the Air Force after he rejected my Freedom of Access of Information Act, he said, oh, you know, those accidents over 50 years old, they're kept in a special vault that requires additional work to go find.
Oh, I see.
Can you come up with a couple more excuses?
And there's like no reason. I mean, well, maybe they were carrying alien bodies from Roswell on all these flights, but my guess is actually that whatever technology they had is way outdated by now, right?
Yeah, right. Letting us know why, you know, like the plane that crashed because it was the jettisons at takeoff.
Mm-hmm.
They don't use that anymore, so it's not like you need to save that secret,
right?
For some reason.
No kidding. That's
so. Mike, you may be interested in my next project, which is going to happen on Saturday. Diane Schaller and I are going to go out to Golden.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, nice.
And we are going to talk to a number of people who have lived in Golden for most of their lives and learn about their experiences in Golden.
Oh, that's great.
That's so cool.
And we're going to do some video and audio recordings of them to preserve them.
That is so cool. I got to interview the Hendersons who owned the little store out there before they died, and wrote something up for New Mexico Magazine about the ghost town of Hagen because her parents had been miners there. And they had a lot of her dad had bought all the merchandise from the Hagen Mercantile when that town folded, a little coal mining town at the north end of the cities. And they had Hagen scrip that miners were paid with. Sometimes they had like lanterns and just amazing stuff from there. And she had wonderful stories and Golden is a great place for those sorts of interviews because it's a lived-in ghost town and there's tons of people that still have a connection. And it had a wonderful newspaper that ran for a long time, the Golden Retort. I have a lot of it printed out.
You do have a bunch of that?
Yeah, from the 1880s and maybe 70s, even 1870s. But they also had at least one other newspaper. They were like a very central mining camp in that area. And they had that school, which you can still see in ruins. That's great. Who are you going to talk to? Like who are?
Well, the key person that's arranged this for us is a gentleman named Michael Galaviz. Do you know him?
No, I don't know him.
And his sister Yolanda, and we're going to talk to Bobby Armijo and Eva Castillo and Liz Tapia, Rick Montoya, Debbie Armijo, and Linda Casas.
Well, we got to do something. We would love to have you on again if you wanted to share some of the stuff you find
Absolutely.
there.
Be a regular correspondent for our show.
Well, I think let me go ahead and wrap up the recorded portion of this anyway. So just thank you so much, Roland, for coming on and talking about this. A really fascinating, strange stuff that sort of skewed my view of Albuquerque. I now figure there's all crashing airplanes for the last 50 years.
How have we not been crashed into yet? From above.
We'll hope to have you on sometime in the near future, and maybe something about Golden would be cool to talk about.
Cool. Well, I'm glad. I'd be glad to do it.
All right.
Awesome. And, thanks, Roland. Stay well, man.
Thank you for listening and or watching. And we'll catch you all next time.